The wood-paneled courtroom was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The high ceiling swallowed every cough and shuffle, magnifying them into echoes. Reporters filled the benches along one wall, pens poised above notepads, phones tilted low as if to hide the fact that they were already streaming this like a sporting event. At the center, Judge Hamilton leaned forward in his chair. He was a tall man with a sagging jawline, his robe freshly pressed, but his tone dripping with disdain. He adjusted his glasses and stared down at the defendant as if peering through a microscope at something barely worth study. "Mr. Norris," he said, drawing out the syllables, "this is not a movie. This is a court of law. You are hereby ordered to pay damages totaling $2 million. The words cracked through the room like the snap of a gavel, though his mallet hadn't touched wood yet. The audience stirred. A few gasps, a low whistle, then that faint ripple of muffled laughter from the back rows, the kind of sound people make when they feel safe, mocking someone powerful because they think he can't answer back. Phones rose higher now, lenses zooming in. To them, this wasn't justice, it was theater. Chuck sat at the defendant's table in a plain gray suit, nothing flashy. His hair, silvered but trimmed neat, caught the overhead lights. He didn't flinch, he didn't argue. Only a faint curl appeared at the edge of his mouth. Not a smirk, but something stranger. An acknowledgement. The laughter rolled across the benches, bouncing like small stones against him. And still he stayed composed, the way a stone outlasts waves. The judge wasn't done. He tapped the papers in front of him with deliberate drama. "You've lived on reputation long enough," Hamilton continued, his voice sharp, meant to draw blood. "But this court doesn't deal in myths or legends. It deals in reality. And in reality, you've lost that word. Lost!" Stirred the room again. People shifted, craned their necks, whispered to their neighbors. One young man near the aisle chuckled openly. "Guess he only wins when there's a script," he said, just loud enough for others to hear. The ripple of amusement grew. Across the aisle, an older woman in a blue coat frowned and shook her head. Her hands twisted in her lap, eyes fixed on Chuck, as if silently urging him not to bow to humiliation. But she said nothing. Most didn't. Chuck's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something hurried. But Chuck barely tilted his head. His eyes were steady, his posture calm, his breathing measured. It wasn't the body of a man crushed under debt or shame. It was the body of someone weighing every insult, every jeer, letting it accumulate without letting it pierce. The silence stretched. Even the judge seemed slightly unsettled by how little reaction he got. Hamilton cleared his throat, tugged at his robe collar, and leaned forward again, determined to stamp control back into the air. But in that silence, something changed. People noticed. The laughter quieted, as they realized the man at the center of their mockery wasn't crumbling, wasn't even shrinking. He was waiting. And for the first time in that courtroom, it was not the gavel or the judge's title that held the weight of authority. It was the calm, deliberate composure of the man being mocked. The judge straightened in his chair, shuffled the papers as if moving to the next stage of the show, but his jaw tightened. The control he thought absolute had slipped, just enough for the room to sense it. In the gallery, someone whispered, "He doesn't look beaten." Another hushed them, but the thought lingered like smoke. Chuck finally shifted in his chair, only slightly, enough to draw every eye back to him. He rested his hands on the table, fingers relaxed, and lifted his gaze toward the bench. His face revealed nothing except the faintest suggestion of patience worn thin. He still hadn't spoken. And in that heavy, deliberate silence, every person in the room Judge, reporter, gawker found themselves leaning forward, waiting for a man they'd dismissed as a relic to open his mouth. The weight of that anticipation was louder than the laughter had been. Just wondering. Where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. The courtroom smelled of dust and paper ink, the kind of stale air that clings to heavy curtains and law books older than most of the people in the gallery. Reporters hunched forward, their pens scratching quickly, while others angled their phones just high enough to capture video without drawing the bailiff's glare. It wasn't reverence that filled the benches. It was the restless excitement of an audience waiting for entertainment. Judge Hamilton leaned back in his high chair, chin lifted as though gravity itself respected his authority. "Mr. Norris," he said slowly, savoring the syllables, "you may have won fights in movies, but here—" He tapped the stack of exhibits on his desk. "Here you will lose everything." The words echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the paneled walls. A smattering of laughter rose from the benches. Not loud, not unanimous, but sharp enough to sting. A young man in a varsity jacket muttered, "Only a legend on VHS," earning a nudge from his friend, and another ripple of chuckles. Phones rose higher. Blue light splashed across faces. The courtroom wasn't a solemn place anymore. It had turned into a circus ring. Hamilton relished it. He leaned forward, hands clasped like a preacher closing in on a sermon. This court does not indulge nostalgia. It does not bend to reputation. It bends to facts, to contracts, to ink. He flicked the papers once for effect, and the facts are clear. Chuck sat motionless at the defense table. The gray suit on his shoulders looked almost too plain, deliberately stripped of glamour. He didn't glance at the cameras. His eyes stayed fixed on the judge, his posture steady. The only movement was a slow inhale, the kind of breath that fills a room more than it fills lungs. The silence around him grew strange. Some of the laughter thinned into awkward coughs. The judge frowned, perhaps realizing he was reacting more to stillness than to speech. He cleared his throat. "Counsel," he snapped toward Chuck's attorney, "advise your client that speeches aren't welcome. If he has fantasies about delivering a monologue, he can save it for a memoir that earned more titters from the back rows." Someone whispered, "Yeah, memoir called Washed Up," and the smirk spread down the aisle like spilled ink. Then Chuck lifted his head. His voice didn't need to rise. It carried anyway, every word measured, each one placed with precision. "Your Honor, with all due respect, truth is tougher than any law twisted by pride." The sound dropped like a hammer, though no gavel had struck. The courtroom stilled. Pens froze. Even the whir of the projector waiting in the corner seemed to pause. A heavy quiet pressed on the benches. The veteran in the second row, who hadn't moved for half an hour, sat up straighter. A reporter lowered her phone without realizing it. The laughter had evaporated, leaving behind a discomfort no one wanted to name. Judge Hamilton shifted in his chair, tugged at his robe, tried to regain rhythm. "That remark," he said sharply, "borders on contempt." But his tone lacked the sharp edge of confidence. Chuck said nothing further. He let the silence stretch, let the room feel the weight of words that weren't bluster, weren't rehearsed. They were just true enough to unnerve. The judge shuffled his papers too quickly. "We will proceed," he barked. "The plaintiff's exhibits are admissible. The contracts will speak louder than any performance." The clerk wheeled forward a cart of binders, setting one thick black spine on the desk with a thud. The judge gestured to the projection screen, which unrolled with a mechanical hum. Onto it flashed the first document. Letterhead, clauses. A signature crisp in the glow of the projector. Hamilton spread his arms toward it like a conductor. This is reality, Mr. Norris. Not myth, not story. Reality. The gallery leaned forward, phones tilted up. A blogger typed furiously, already framing the narrative. But Chuck didn't look at the screen. He turned instead to the hard copy placed before him. His thumb traced the corner of the page, eyes narrowing slightly, not at the contract itself, but at something finer. Ink where it should have been pen, a halo around the date where toner had bled. His attorney whispered urgently, but Chuck didn't respond. His expression hadn't changed. Only his focus had, sharpening as though a new layer of the room had revealed itself to him alone. Hamilton noticed. "This court is not a forum for conspiracy theories," he said brusquely. "You will accept what's presented." Chuck finally raised his eyes again. His tone stayed calm, unshaken. "This trial is not about me losing. It's about you hiding." The words carried further than the judge's threats. Gasps rippled across the benches. The court reporter's fingers hesitated. The veteran in the second row leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on Chuck. Hamilton slammed his gavel, harder than necessary. "Order! Order in the court!" he barked. But the sound didn't erase what had just been said. For the first time that night, the balance of power in the room wavered, and everyone felt it. The projection screen glowed white against the paneled wall. The first contract stretched across it like an X-ray. Judge Hamilton's voice had taken on a rhythm, a performance cadence. He spoke of clauses and obligations, of numbers that built to inevitability. Every line he cited stacked weight against the man at the defense table. "Exhibit A," he intoned, gesturing with his pen. "Signed by Mr. Norris, clear as day. Witnessed, notarized. The obligation is inescapable." The reporters leaned closer. Keys clicked, pens scribbled, phones recorded. From the gallery came a low murmur, approval from some, resignation from others. The clerk wheeled up another binder, heavy and black, and set it down with a dull thud. The sound echoed like punctuation. Chuck kept his eyes on the paper copy before him. The scan on the wall was for the audience. The page in his hands was for him. He tilted it slightly under the lights, thumb tracing the margin. The signature line was smooth, too smooth. Ink should bite into the page, leaving tiny ridges. This was flat, sterile. His lawyer whispered quickly, urging patience, but Chuck didn't respond. He adjusted the sheet again, eyes narrowing at the faint blur around the date stamp. Printer toner, not rubber ink. And the seal, no raised texture at all. "Defense?" Hamilton asked, impatience threading his voice. "Any legitimate objection?" The lawyer rose. "Your Honor, we request clarification of chain of custody for this exhibit." Hamilton waved a dismissive hand. "Routine. Documents were logged. We're not questioning housekeeping." The clerk glanced at a form. "Courier delivery, 3:07 p.m. on Sunday. Logged, scanned, filed." Chuck lifted his gaze. His tone stayed calm. "Sunday?" The word landed harder than volume could. The clerk hesitated. "I wasn't on duty Sunday. I came in Monday, but the log shows Sunday." She frowned. "I didn't sign that intake." The gallery shifted. Whispers scattered through the benches. Reporters stopped writing and raised their heads. A veteran in the second row leaned forward, cap shadowing his eyes. Hamilton rapped his gavel once. "Irrelevant. We proceed." Chuck tapped the page with one finger. "Your Honor, may I request the document be placed under magnification?" The judge scowled. "We don't turn hearings into science fairs." But the gallery wasn't laughing now. Too many had seen the clerk's face. Too many had caught the hesitation. The judge gestured sharply. "Fine. Briefly, the clerk slid the page beneath the document camera. The projector coughed and focused. On the wall, the signature filled the screen. Up close, the clean line of the N revealed itself as a staircase of pixels. Digital, not ink. No variation, no indentation, no life. Gasps spread through the benches. One reporter muttered, "That's printed," forgetting her mic was live. Chuck's voice was steady. "A signature isn't supposed to look like that. You can feel a real one under your thumb. Try it. You'll find no Ridge Plaintiffs' Counsel jumped in, voice bright with forced confidence. Artifacts of scanning. Nothing more. The defense is chasing ghosts in toner dots. Then call the notary," Chuck said evenly. "Ask when they witnessed it. Ask if they were here Sunday at 3. In a locked building, Hamilton's pen stopped tapping. His jaw tightened. He glanced toward the clerk, then away. The gallery was restless now. No laughter, no jeers, just the hum of something shifting. A blogger mouthed, "Holy hell," while another reporter underlined Sunday 3 times in her notes. Hamilton slammed the gavel again. "Order! This is a court of law, not a theater." But the theater was already happening. And for the first time, the audience wasn't laughing at Chuck. They were watching the judge. Chuck slid the paper back toward the clerk, hands calm. "This trial isn't about me losing. It's about you hiding." The words didn't explode. They sank, heavy, undeniable. Even the bailiff froze mid-step. Hamilton cleared his throat. Recess. 10 minutes. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He left through the side door, robe flaring behind him. The gallery erupted. Reporters bolted into the aisle. The veteran muttered, "Courthouse doesn't open Sundays," and the people near him nodded grimly. Chuck stayed seated, folding his hands as though nothing had changed. But in the eyes of everyone else, the balance of the room had shifted. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted so suddenly it was almost physical. The same benches that had held smirks and laughter now leaned forward with suspicion. Not at Chuck, but at the man presiding over the bench. Judge Hamilton, who had seemed untouchable a half-hour ago, was blinking too often, his hands moving with restless sharpness over papers that no longer carried the same authority. The gallery whispered in pockets that overlapped into a growing tide. Sunday delivery. Fake stamp. Pixelated signature. The words floated, mixed with the rustle of coats and the click of phones capturing every angle. Reporters spoke into their mics in hurried half-sentences, voices rising with the energy of breaking news. Hamilton struck the gavel hard. "Order! I said order in the court!" His voice cracked the air, sharper than before. Not the confident tone of command, but the edge of someone trying to pull the reins on a horse already bolting. He jabbed a finger at the defense table. "Mr. Norris is stalling. This is a distraction, nothing more." But the faces in the room told a different story. No one looked at Chuck like a staller. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't flailed his arms, hadn't even stood. He simply sat, steady and deliberate, letting silence weigh heavier than any outburst. That composure was its own argument. Hamilton raised his volume again, pounding the gavel as if sound could drown doubt. "This proceeding will continue as planned. Anyone recording may be held in contempt." Yet the phones stayed up, unafraid. The authority he had wielded minutes ago had bled out into the benches. Chuck let the noise play out, waiting. He lifted his gaze only after the gavel's echo had died into the wood. "Your Honor," he said slowly, "if you want order, it begins with clarity." He paused, long enough that the room leaned into the silence, 1,000 held breaths pressing at the air. Then, calmly, "Who received the Sunday delivery?" The judge flinched, not visibly, but enough that the reporters caught it. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Irrelevant," he barked. Chuck's eyes didn't waver. "Who signed the clerk's name?" Hamilton's pen tapped 3 times in a rush, a staccato betraying nerves. "This is not interrogation," he snapped. "This is a trial." Chuck folded his hands together on the table, patient as stone. "Then let's treat it like one. Ask the witness. Ask her when she signed it. She already told us. She didn't." His words weren't loud, but each landed like the sound of a lock sliding open. The gallery murmured again, a chorus of agreement hidden in low tones. Even those who had laughed earlier were now staring at the bench with suspicion, as though realizing they might have cheered the wrong side. Hamilton slammed the gavel. "Enough! This is my courtroom." Chuck waited for the last echo to fade, then leaned forward slightly, elbows still on the table. His voice stayed even. "Truth doesn't belong to you." The silence afterward was suffocating. Every pause Chuck allowed became a tool, every delay stretching the tension tighter. The reporter's pens scratched furiously, trying to trap the moment on paper, while the bailiff shifted uneasily, torn between duty to the judge and the sense that something had already slipped beyond his control. Hamilton's face reddened. He pointed at the clerk. "Read the record of Exhibit B," he demanded. His tone was brittle, aggressive, a man swinging harder as he loses his balance. Chuck interrupted, but not with volume, with timing. He let the judge's words hang halfway, then asked, "Why do the courier logs use her signature when she wasn't here?" The gallery erupted in whispers, louder this time. The clerk looked down, her lips moving silently, as though replaying the moment she'd realized her name had been forged. Hamilton banged the gavel again, voice straining. "Order! Sit down! Quiet!" He was standing now, robe shifting with each jerky motion. The more he raised his voice, the more his authority drained from him. Chuck, still seated, waited. He let the silence after the shouting expand, let the room recover its breath. Then he asked another question, soft, precise. "Who benefits from a forged contract?" The gallery froze. Phones lifted higher. Reporters shot each other quick electric glances. Hamilton sputtered, searching for control. "This is outrageous!" But no one laughed anymore. No one jeered. Every eye was fixed on the defense table, where Chuck sat unmoving, unshaken, asking questions that cut deeper than fists. The trial no longer felt like paperwork and procedure. It felt like a fight, one where the blows weren't physical, but landed just as hard. Each pause before Chuck spoke was a feint. Each calm word was a strike. And the judge, who had entered the ring certain of victory, was the one showing bruises first. The bailiff's shout for order was swallowed by the noise. The gallery had become restless, phones raised like a forest of glowing eyes. Every face leaned toward the witness stand, waiting. Judge Hamilton dabbed his forehead, robe tugged tight around him, trying to rebuild authority through ritual. "We will proceed with testimony," he announced, voice louder than it needed to be. "Call Mr. Leary." The doors opened, and Thomas Leary entered with the assurance of someone used to boardrooms, not courts. Navy suit, neat beard, steady gait. He took the oath quickly, then sat with the calm of a man who thought his presence alone could seal the cracks in the case. Plaintiff's counsel wasted no time. "Mr. Leary, did you personally witness Mr. Norris sign the contract known as Exhibit A?" "Yes," Leary said smoothly. "On the 15th. Downtown office, conference room C, 3 in the afternoon. He signed, we countersigned, notary sealed. And was there anything unusual about that signing?" "No." The gallery quieted, lulled by the certainty. For a moment, Hamilton looked almost comfortable again. Then the defense rose. Chuck stayed seated, hands folded, but his lawyer stepped to the lectern. He didn't posture. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Mr. Leary, at 3 p.m. on the 15th, where were you?" Leary blinked. "Conference room C." The lawyer held up a page. "Your building's security log. No weekend staff signed in. No record of Miss Alvarez, the notary you mentioned." Another page followed. "And your social media account. A photo posted at 1:10 p.m. boarding a plane to Boston. Captioned, 'Mom's birthday. See you Monday, L.A.'" The gallery gasped. Reporters shot glances at each other, already scribbling. The veteran in the second row muttered, "Got him." Leary stiffened. "I schedule posts ahead of time." "Metadata confirms it was live," the lawyer replied. "So again, if you were on a plane, who watched Norris sign Exhibit A?" Leary shifted, tugged his tie, scratched his jaw. "Perhaps it was earlier. Or later." The lawyer shook his head. "Earlier? Your assistant, Kara, swiped out at 12:48. Later? The building was locked." He set the paper down flat. "So when, exactly?" The silence stretched until the room itself seemed to lean toward the stand. Leary's mouth opened, but nothing came. Chuck finally moved. He turned his head toward Leary, his tone even, almost gentle. "Tom, look at the signature." "That's not my pen." "You know it." Leary's face collapsed inward. No denial left. Chuck shifted his gaze to the bench. "You wanted $2 million, he said, his voice steady. "But what you really owe is the truth." Applause broke like a wave from the back rows. First scattered claps, then a surge, until the whole room thundered. People stood. Reporters clapped with pens still in hand. The bailiff shouted, "Order!" but his voice was drowned. Hamilton pounded his gavel. "Enough! This is not a stadium. Sit down." His face flushed crimson, the veins in his neck straining, but the applause didn't vanish. It ebbed into a steady hum, the kind of defiance that doesn't need volume to be heard. Leary sat rigid, sweat beating at his temple. I may have been mistaken about the time," he muttered. "It could have been earlier." The lawyer let the weakness hang. No need to push further. The room felt the collapse. Hamilton grabbed the gavel again. "The witness has testified," he declared, voice too loud, too sharp. "The exhibits remain valid." "This court will not be derailed," the gallery muttered angrily. Journalists looked at one another with disbelief. For the first time, the judge himself looked cornered. Chuck leaned back slightly, expression calm. He didn't look like a man fighting for survival. He looked like one waiting for a storm to finish. Hamilton's voice cracked as he shouted over the whispers, "Enough delays! I have the authority, and I have a verdict ready." The words landed heavy, freezing the room. No scribbling, no coughing, no shuffling, just stillness. The shock of a judge declaring the end before the fight was done. The gallery knew it. Reporters knew it. Even the bailiff knew it. Something irreversible had just been spoken aloud, and the courtroom braced for what was coming next. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. "This court has reached a verdict," Judge Hamilton announced, words tumbling over themselves in a rush. His face was red, his robe damp at the collar, but his voice tried to climb back to its former height. "The defendant is liable. Damages as requested." The gallery erupted, not in applause this time, but in disbelief. Reporters gasped audibly, cameras zoomed, people leaned across benches whispering furiously. A woman near the front hissed, "He can't do that!" Someone in the back shouted, "Shame!" The bailiff barked for silence, but his own voice cracked under the noise. Chuck sat motionless, as if he had expected this play all along. His lawyer rose, face pale with fury, but Chuck placed a steady hand on his sleeve. The gesture wasn't dismissal, it was command. Wait. Hamilton adjusted his glasses with a trembling hand. This decision is final, he said. We will not entertain theatrics. The defense attorney drew a breath, then set a thick folder on the table with a thud that silenced the first few rows. His voice was steady now, sharpened by restraint. Your Honor, before this ruling is entered, the defense submits new evidence. An internal investigation by the state's Judicial Oversight Commission. The words sliced the room open. Reporters lunged forward, microphones extended, cameras already live. Hamilton's face drained of color. Irrelevant, he spat. Completely outside the record. The lawyer flipped open the folder, pulling out stamped documents. It is very relevant. It details a pattern of misconduct tied directly to you, Judge Hamilton. Forged filings, collusion with Oriole Media. The very same courier signature that appeared in Exhibit A appears on 3 other falsified cases under your supervision. The gallery exploded. Shouts, gasps, the slap of hands on benches. Phones thrust higher. Red lights blinking live. The bailiff's voice was drowned in the storm. Hamilton pounded his gavel until his arm shook. This is contempt, he roared, but his voice cracked, and the cracks spread wider than the sound. Chuck rose, finally. He didn't look at the judge. He turned to face the gallery, the cameras, the entire waiting country beyond the walls. His voice cut clean through the chaos. I didn't need to win, he said. I just needed the truth to walk into this room. The gallery answered with thunderous applause. The sound was deafening, but not uncontrolled. It was the roar of relief, the catharsis of seeing power falter under weight it couldn't suppress. People stood, clapping until the benches rattled. Some shouted his name. Others simply cried. Hamilton shouted for order, but his words bounced uselessly against the noise. His robe sagged around his shoulders, his hands trembling on the gavel. For the first time, he looked smaller than the desk he sat behind. A court officer approached from the side door, whispered in the judge's ear. Hamilton's eyes flickered, then froze. He shook his head violently, but the officer laid a sealed envelope on the bench. The insignia was unmistakable. Judicial Conduct Board. The gallery fell into a hushed wave as Hamilton tore it open with stiff fingers. His lips moved silently over the words, but his face betrayed everything. The color draining, the jaw slackening, the gavel slipping slightly from his grip. The officer's voice rang clear enough for all to hear. By order of the Commission, Judge Hamilton is hereby suspended pending investigation. The room detonated. Applause, shouts, cheers, even tears. Reporters streamed toward the exits to file breaking alerts. The veteran in the second row stood tall, his faded cap clutched to his chest. The bailiff didn't even try to silence the gallery. His own eyes were damp, his jaw clenched with something between duty and relief. Hamilton slumped back in his chair, pale, lips pressed tight, robe suddenly nothing more than fabric. Chuck looked at him for the first time in minutes. His gaze wasn't angry. If anything, it was almost pitying. He gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the man's collapse not as triumph, but as inevitability. Then he turned away, collected his papers, and set them neatly in his briefcase. The gallery parted as he walked down the aisle. Reporters shouted questions, flashes lit the room like lightning. Chuck paused once, only once, just outside the doors where the night air waited. Justice isn't about money, he said. His voice was low but carried. "It's about character." The words silenced even the applause. For a breathless second, the room was utterly still, the truth hanging there heavier than the verdict that had been stripped away. Then the ovation began again, louder, sustained, shaking the floor. Chuck didn't linger. He pushed the doors open, stepped into the hallway, and walked with steady pace into the echo of cameras and voices. Behind him, the courtroom roared, but his stride was calm, unhurried, as if he had carried this ending with him from the start. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. The courthouse steps were already crowded with people spilling from side doors, phones held aloft, voices rising like surf. Journalists jostled for position, microphones thrust forward, each trying to capture a quote that would lead the morning's headlines. Chuck descended the steps slowly, his hands loose at his sides. He didn't shield his face from the flashes. He didn't quicken his stride. The crowd surged forward, but parted enough to let him pass. Some clapped again, others simply stood in silence, watching as though they were witnessing not a man, but a turning point. He reached the curb, paused, and looked back once at the building glowing under floodlights. For a long moment, he stood there, breathing in the night, the echo of the courtroom still vibrating in his chest. Then he gave a small nod, not to the cameras, not to the crowd, but to the idea that had carried him through. Truth, heavier than power, louder than law, twisted by pride. And with that, he stepped into the waiting car, leaving the courthouse behind him. A building now quieter than it had been in years, stripped bare by its own corruption.